Hello, my beautiful friends, our Dr. Humans, and welcome back to the podcast and another episode in our series on the unshakable mindsets. This is pillar number 3 of the unshakable mindsets, and I'm so excited because this is my personal favorite. It is my personal favorite, 1, because I believe it gives us the most power, and 2, because it's really the underdog to me. It's a space that I didn't know I could get more power in myself from. In fact, it's a space that I didn't feel was powerful at all. I knew that I needed to be more unshakable in my mindset in terms of my relationship with other people, in terms of my relationship with uncertainty, needing control, and in terms of my relationship with myself, in terms of valuing myself. But I didn't know how much I had to gain by changing my mindset in this pillar. And so with that, keep an open mind. Allow yourself to be kind of rubbed the wrong way or feel quite distanced and disconnected from some of these beliefs and mindsets that I offer you in this video. But promise me that you'll keep an open mind and you'll allow yourself to challenge yourself and even just come back to these mindsets again at a later time for yourself. Because even with my initial resistance to working on my mindset in this area, I am so incredibly grateful that I did. And I want you to feel that gratitude for yourself too. This is definitely one of the unshakable mindset pillars where I have so much more to offer you here. And even with that, there is truly years of learning in this one episode. But here's the key. This learning needs to be experiential. Again, we know in mindset coaching, you believe a thought if you've adopted a mindset when it shows up in your behavior and results. You cannot do this work, especially in this pillar, intellectually. I need you to get into your body. I need you to have real life experiences with this work in order to adopt the belief. So don't just hear these mindsets and nod your head to them and be like, that sounds lovely, that sounds interesting, that sounds cool, I agree. Live in these mindsets. Tomorrow, this week, bring one of these mindsets into your life, and then you'll really see what it offers you and where you have more work that you want to do for yourself to be more unshakable in this area. All right, without further adoration of this pillar on my part, welcome. My beautiful friends, I am so excited that you are here for this pillar of being unshakable. The pillar in the unshakable mindset on our relationship with emotions. And for a lot of this, I'll talk about our relationship with suffering in particular, because it's that wanting to avoid and escape the suffering that steals so many of our best decisions and most unshakable behaviors from us. And this is completely understandable that it is such a dominating challenge for a lot of us and something that holds a lot of us back, because changing this relationship with discomfort really goes against a lot of our brain's very basic kind of evolutionary programming, which in the most simple terms that I'm sure you'll all appreciate when you look at your own life is our subconscious mind will generally try and avoid discomfort, move towards pleasure, and do that in the most resource efficient way. Changing my relationship with negative emotions was probably the most dramatic transformation that I've received from mindset coaching. A lot of people think that mindset coaching is about thoughts, about thought work and thinking differently, cognitive changes. But to me, emotions are completely inseparable, and certainly the way that I teach it, that you'll see throughout Dare Darling, I teach you not only about your thoughts, but equally about your emotions, because I know they're so powerful. And emotions and having emotional activations is also fundamental to the way that we actually can change our brain through these processes, through putting our brain in a place that is actually making it plastic, neuroplastic, in order to create changes. So for so many reasons, emotions and your ability to feel them and stop avoiding them are so important to you having the life that you want, to being unshakable and getting your best results from mindset coaching. So I am so excited you are here. My beautiful friends, the first mindset, belief, model of thinking about the world that I want to offer you when it comes to your relationship with emotions is there's no escape or fix for negative emotions, for discomfort and for suffering in our lives. What I'm referring to here is the rule of thirds, as I recently heard an Olympian talk about her Olympic coach describe this phenomenon that I've been talking about kind of clumsily as in your life, in a good life, expect that there will always be this rough balance of a third positive, a third negative, and a third neutral emotions. That there's no version of human life, human experience, human consciousness where we specifically no longer experience discomfort. And for some of you guys, you might hear this and be like, yeah, Beck, obviously. And for some of you guys, you might be like, whoa, wait a second. I have been striving and working and trying to do the right thing, subconsciously usually, believing that once I've done it right, once I've worked hard enough, once I've achieved enough, once I'm a good person, then I will get to just feel positive. I will get to be happy. I will get to live an enjoyable, peaceful life. You know, including thinking that, and certainly I had this when I was very early on in medicine, thinking that if I could pick a niche specialty, I could become such an expert in that specialty that the work would no longer be uncertain or difficult or hard to the point that I'd be making mistakes or not knowing what to do, that I could reach some level of expertise where I always knew the right answer. And this was a very young, naive perspective and understanding of science. I was not aware of the limitations of science. I had so much faith and belief in science, and I thought that the reason that I didn't know the answers was just because I hadn't consumed, read and understood enough of the science yet. And you know, I remember having thoughts when I entered med school thinking, it's going to be so wonderful. I'm going to work so hard and it's going to be so wonderful when I'm an expert and I just know the answers. And again, I thought it was a problem with me, a deficit in me, that I didn't know the answers yet, not understanding that the world doesn't know the answers. And perhaps for a lot of things, there aren't answers that even our scientific methods can quantify or describe or even perceive. And fast forward with me fully embodying this rule of thirds mindset, I now understand that it's not even just about accepting the 1/3 of life that's going to be uncomfortable, unpleasant, or negative, but actually having that full spectrum of emotions is what makes me feel like I am having the fullest, most enriching, most fulfilling human experience. I recognize now that I've stopped resisting and making the negative emotions a problem, I now realize I actually want those in my life. They're a fundamental part of the life that I want to live because of my value set and because of the nature of the life that I want to live and how I want to perceive the world. More on that later. And for me, when I talk about the full spectrum, I'm also thinking about the depths and the heights of the negative and the positive emotion. I want that full range available to me, and that's what makes me feel most alive, when I can feel all of those experiences. But what we find is we can't selectively numb just the negative emotions and then feel the full heights of the positive emotions. So if I want to be able to experience the heights of the positive, I need to be able to feel the depths of the negative emotions too. And as I'll talk about later, this is just one way that the negative emotions come part and parcel with the positive emotions. The highest heights of the positive emotions come reciprocally with the greatest depths of the negative emotions too. So if I want one, I must accept the other. And wanting that one makes me want the other. Let's talk first in terms of how this mindset affects your behavior. So you can understand in a very tangible way whether this is a mindset that you want to take on, a way of thinking, a belief, a model of the world that you want to take on in terms of what it can give you back. And particularly here, let's talk first about the way that I see it holds people back when they don't take on this mindset. So one of the major, most painful problems I see in my clients, my ambitious, hungry clients who want to live big, full lives, a major problem I see when they don't have the mindset of the rule of thirds is they can choose subconsciously to avoid goals, pursuing what they want, pursuing the life they want, pursuing growth and change and exploration and just better or different in their life. They avoid that because they think that that means they'll avoid the negative emotions. They think if they don't do that big, scary thing, that big uncertain thing, that hard thing, that out of the box thing that isn't the traditional path, the pre-approved of path, the praiseworthy path, a normal thing to do or want, that they'll then be inviting less discomfort, unpleasant emotions into their life. And again, this is very subconscious, but we do see it sort of more on the surface in terms of the reasoning we give for decision making. And on a very superficial surface level, which is where most of us live in our day-to-day lives in terms of the glimpses of our conscious thinking that we get, this subconscious strategic avoidance will come out in phrases and reasoning like, well, I'm not going to do it because it won't work. Well, that's a bad idea. But when you ask why? Why is that a bad idea? Well, it's a bad idea because there's a high chance of failure. Why is it a problem there's a high chance of failure? Well, because if there's a high chance of failure, then I will have lost these resources, this time, I'll be in this difficult position, and it will hurt my reputation in this way. And why are those things a problem? And we keep asking why to understand what's the value set behind this, or what's the purpose behind this decision. And at the end of the whys, we usually find, well, because it'll feel bad. And of course, it only feels bad to fail because of what we make it mean, because of our mindset. We know there are people who can fail, classically entrepreneurs or people who have done magnificent, ridiculous, mind-blowing things. They've had to fail a lot in order to get to where they were. So they likely had a very good relationship with failure. But the point is, we avoid doing the thing we want. We avoid pursuing what we want. We take the opportunity for having what we want off the table just because we think that it's going to help us avoid a negative emotion. We think that it's going to help us avoid having more negative emotion in our life. But the rule of thirds tells you hard there, but it's also hard here, right? No matter what path you pick, and even no matter whether you succeed or fail on that path, you're going to have this balance of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. Really think about that for me. Think about, we believe that when we succeed, we're going to have more happiness in our life. We might even implicitly believe that then we will be happy once we make this achievement. But guys, I know most of you listening are doctors. You have had so many achievements along the path of your life, and are you happy? Are you happy 100% of the time? Do you feel good 100% of the time? And yet, you, like all of us humans, would have had that arrival fallacy back then before you achieved it, in some implicit way thinking, when I arrive there, then life's gonna be sorted, life's gonna be good. But I want you to study yourself and build some self-awareness. Has that ever been the case? Did you ever eradicate discomfort from your life by an achievement, by arriving somewhere? By changing whatever circumstance in your life, were you ever able to eradicate the pain, the suffering, the discomfort, the unease, the anxiety, the disappointment, the restlessness, the agitation, the sadness? No. I even caught myself doing this the other day. We went to our financial planner, we made a plan to pay off the houses in so many years, and I was like, oh, I can't wait for that time. And yeah, life will be different in some ways there, but it won't overall be better, right? I'm not going to suddenly not have these negative emotional experiences to deal with, because that's a fundamental part of human life. Some problems will be solved, and I will graduate into new problems as well, problems as my mind sees it. You know, there was a time where all I wanted was to get into the housing market, and all I wanted was for my pre-approval to come through. And then as a human, I move the goalpost. My mind moves the goalpost, and also the rest of life happens, right? It's quite funny that we think that one achievement or solving one problem in one area of our life will then make the rest of it magically, quote, fixed or different too. What that would require is a massive shift in mindset, not in your circumstances, not in your situation. I want you to think about these arrival fallacies in your life too. Think about it in terms of becoming a consultant or an attendee. You would have been holding your breath like most of us, trying to get out of that registrar or resident phase where you truly were working so hard. And yes, life was very hard in that phase. And also, it was easy in some respects in that phase too, wasn't it? Even just think first about less responsibility. Think next about not having a private practice element, not having a business to run. Then you probably had no free time, which was a problem in itself. But now you have free time, and the problem is you get to decide how are you going to spend this precious time. You've got more money now. You get to decide, how am I going to spend this precious money? And with that comes the potential to lose the money that you've earned. So coming back, the true offering of the rule of thirds, what it does is it gets us out of this arrival fallacy, thinking that life is better there, that it'll be better there than here. And instead recognizing that life isn't better or worse necessarily based on our circumstances. You know, there are many millionaires and celebrities who have achieved everything they wanted, who are deeply unhappy and even unwell in terms of mental health, and addicted to escaping their reality with all kinds of substances in order to feel better. So with that, the offering is to not rush through life as you're living it right now, to not dismiss what you have because you think this isn't as good as what that is, but to recognize that if you want to feel better, if you want to feel less negative, knowing that your emotions come from your thoughts. It's your thoughts. It's the way that you see the world, and it's the way that you see what you have that will change how you feel and have you feel less negative. In particular though, I want you to recognize where you're choosing to not pursue goals because you think that by avoiding doing that difficult thing, that challenging thing, that thing that puts you at risk, that thing that has you potentially lose what you have now, you're also mistaken to think that by not going for it, you're going to have less negative emotions in your life. There are no circumstances that can offer you escaping the discomfort, the pain, the suffering of life. Yeah, when you stay in that zone of competence, you get the benefits and the positive emotions of certainty and ease and efficiency. You get to think of yourself as an expert in that area. But you also take on then the negative emotions of that zone of competence, which can be boredom, stagnation, dissatisfaction. Now, although the discomforts, the unpleasantness, the risks, the negative emotions that come with taking a risk, stepping out of your competence zone and going for that thing you want, that new different thing that you want, probably very vividly brings to mind those discomforts of uncertainty, fear, incompetence, failure, the damaged ego. That choice, that path also comes with the positive emotions, the positive experience of growth, a sense of progress, excitement, satisfaction, fulfillment, especially if it's an empowered decision. So even if you just compare those two things in broad strokes, you can see both have a balance of emotions, just different flavors. And in neither do you get to avoid or escape the negative. So this mindset really helps with the decision making of what you do. When we take out this flawed concept that you can make a right or good decision that will put you in a position where you get to escape the discomfort of life, when you take that flawed thinking off the table that confuses what you want, now you can choose what you want from a cleaner, more reasoned place. So it can help our decision making and help us to stop spinning in indecision as we're hopelessly trying to find a path that is going to create that dominantly positive and minimally negative outcome or journey. And it can also help us on our journeys as we're making these decisions, as we're tracking along that growth path and then inevitably hitting an obstacle and having that discomfort come up. And when we know about the rule of thirds, then when that discomfort comes up, we don't automatically make it mean, oh, I must have made the wrong decision, right? We can stop operating from the mindset of, if I make the right decision, if I just make the right decision, if I've made the right decision, then I'll be happy. Then it won't be hard or nothing will go wrong. You cannot pick a path. You cannot arrive at a destination where you no longer have that third negative in your life. You will always live a life of discomfort, but it feels like today we have pathologized negative emotion. When I truly believe I'm living my best life, I can say that full-heartedly. I love the life I'm living. This is my best life. And yes, I'm on a journey and it's evolving and changing, but I truly am living my best life. I'm living my dream life. And that is still a third negative emotional experiences. And it's brilliant. I love it. And the reason I love it, the reason it's brilliant is because I've changed my relationship with negative emotions, which is what I'm offering you in this pillar as a whole here. And here's the thing. When you don't have a good relationship with negative emotions, when you have a bad relationship with your negative emotions, that's what increases the percentage of negative emotions that you'll feel and experience in your life. When I had a bad relationship with negative emotions, my life was like probably 80+% negative emotions. With my good relationship with negative emotions, ironically, it's now sitting at that solid third. And of course, I teach you the how of having a good relationship with your emotions and how to actually change your relationship with your emotions inside Dare Darling. Find it in the emotions toolbox videos in our mind management system on how your mind works and how to work with your mind. In there, I talk about a really useful concept from Buddhism called the second arrow. But in short, let me tell you what my bad relationship with negative emotions used to have me doing. I used to fear my own fear response, right? I used to fear that nervous system activation and the loss of control that I'd have in that. My voice shaking, not being able to think straight. I used to be anxious that my anxiety would worsen. I was depressed that I was depressed. We can be stressed about our stress. We can be panicking about our panic. We can be sad about our sadness, or we can be ashamed of our sadness. We can be frustrated with our despair or lack of motivation. And what we're doing is we're stacking negative emotion on top of negative emotion, instead of recovering back to a neutral or positive emotion as we would otherwise naturally do with a good relationship in a normal 24-hour day. More on that in the other lessons in Dare Darling. So it's hard here, it's hard there, it hurts here, it'll hurt there. We're happy here, we'll be happy there. With that, without muddling ourselves thinking we can escape the human experience, now, what do you want? There's no right or wrong. There's just preferences and desires and inclinations to explore. And with that, now we can allow our value set to come into our decisions instead of letting our emotions subconsciously drive what we do because we think we're going to feel better there versus here, on this path versus that path, with this outcome versus that outcome. You might find you really value having that life where you don't explore too much and you stay in a zone of expertise and you niche down really hard. And that's what flavor of life, that's what flavor of good and bad you want to live. For me, I really enjoy a sense of growth, a sense of progress. I like to explore what I'm capable of, and in particular the impact that I can have. So I love medicine. I didn't leave the traditional path of medicine because I didn't like it, but because I found something that I wanted even more, that excited me even more. So I started my one-on-one coaching, and everything was going so awesomely with my one-on-one coaching. I've got dozens and dozens and dozens of people on my wait list, and yet I still decided to open my group and change this good situation that I had, because it was a values-based decision. For me personally, I wanted the exploration and the growth and the sense of progress and the journey of experimenting, trialing and erroring and working things out. And I also, from a values-based place, wanted to reach and impact more people. Unconfused, not believing that life as a traditional doctor or life as a mindset coach in an enormous group program would be better or worse one way or the other, more painful, less painful, more uncomfortable, less uncomfortable, one way or the other. I could simply ask, what do I want? What's in my value set? How do I want to show up in the world? How do I want to affect the world? What do you want? What are your values? How do you want to show up in the world? How do you want to affect the world? What experiences do you want to create for yourself? Knowing that you can't escape the negative ones. Now, very quickly, just because I've mainly focused on the rule of thirds in terms of choosing to pursue what you want and going for your goals, as opposed to mistakenly thinking that we can get out of the rule of thirds by avoiding our goals, avoiding doing the hard thing, avoiding doing the scary, uncertain thing. I just quickly want to step back and zoom out into more of a human experience-based motivation and set of reasoning that I use for taking on the rule of thirds in my life. And that is that it actually is the nature of the world. Again, this is my belief, my mindset that you can choose to take or not, that I'm offering to you. To me, it is the nature of the world to have positive and negative. In the same way we have night and day, we have sun and rain, we have seasons, we have life and death, we have cycles. And I think it is a human phenomenon to believe that the world should be positive all the time, and that if everything was right, it would be positive all the time. But as I've gotten closer and closer to my true authentic experience, I really have come to appreciate that the up and down, the black and white, the sun, the rain, these contrasts are inherently how the world is and the reason why the world works. You know, I've touched on, with bigger success comes bigger problems. With bigger responsibility comes a greater extent that you can cause harm. With big love comes great loss. You know, everything that I choose to love in my life, fully love and enjoy, I know that that comes with the reciprocal of not wanting to lose that because I love it so much. And yes, we can grieve and move forwards and adapt to a new life, but I know that because I've chosen to love something so much, it's going to hurt when it's gone. People talk about their children being the greatest challenge in their life and at the same time, the greatest joy and fulfillment of their life. And again, I've realized what makes me feel most alive is the full spectrum, not only the negatives, neutrals, and positives, but also the heights and the depths. That's where I feel most alive. And when you have a good relationship with negative emotions, feeling bad doesn't feel so bad. Feeling bad feels right in so many cases. And on that note, we don't realize that we truly do want to feel negatively about certain things as moral, values-based human beings. We want to have that capacity to feel negative emotions, right? Because again, the world is not a positive, happy, just, fair, kind place. The world has so much cruelty and violence and pain and suffering. And if you want to be happy all the time, you either need to be in denial of the human experience and the nature of the world. Just look to the animal kingdom, to the enormous amount of violence that you can witness across all the different species. But even just with humans, I don't know if there's ever been a period in history where there hasn't been violence and cruelty and people taking advantage of other people who are more vulnerable. And if you want to not experience negative emotions in this world that is that way natured, then you're gonna need to have positive thoughts or neutral thoughts about those things. And do you want that? Is that the kind of person you want to be? There's literally no judgment here. I am genuinely asking, what kind of person do you want to be? That's the question to answer, because how you feel is based on how you think. The balance of emotions that you'll have in your life will be based on how you think about the situations, the circumstances of the world. I choose the mindset of the rule of thirds. I do not believe that I can escape negative emotions no matter what clever, calculated choice I make. I make decisions based off different reasons from my values. If it's hard here and hard there, if it hurts here and it hurts there, if you can be happy here and happy there, what will you choose? So we've talked about the rule of thirds, the full emotional spectrum, which is really about expectations, about expecting that there's nothing we can do to avoid that negative experience that we're going to have in our human lives. And I briefly mentioned that if we don't have that good relationship with negative emotions and we make those negative emotions a problem in themselves, then we'll adjust our own behavior and decisions in order to avoid and escape those emotions. And in doing that, we're actually going to create, ironically, more negative emotions in our life. We're going to tip this balance off so that we have so much more negative and so much less neutral and positive experiences in our life, because ironically we didn't want to have the negative emotions in the first place. We weren't willing to feel those emotions. Now, this is a normal human response. I just want to say that up front, to withdraw from and try and avoid and distance ourselves from discomfort. It's kind of a part of one of our fundamental basic compasses. You're like, oh, pain, don't touch that stove. It's a learning experience. And also, we know the reason we're feeling a negative emotion is not because of what's actually happening in the situation. It's not because the subject that we're interpreting or perceiving is inherently negative, but it's because of the thought that we have about that subject. It's because of what we're perceiving, the meaning that we're adding. That's what creates the negative emotion. So I'm saying that because as much as our body understands on a very basic level that discomfort is something that we want to withdraw from because it's potentially threatening or damaging, that's actually not a very smart algorithm in our mind. It's overly simplistic. And actually, you know from this mind management concept that we can perceive things as a problem, as negative, as threats that aren't actually. And it's just that perception of them that creates the negative emotion. So that's one thing. Sometimes our negative emotions are kind of like a false positive in that way. They're meant to say, hey, attention, there's a potential problem here. There's a perceived threat. I'm perceiving a threat here. So fight, flight, freeze, appease, whatever survival response there is to remove ourselves from that threat. And beyond those perceptions often being flawed in themselves, there's also situations where there are potential threats. You know, there are risks of doing what we're doing. Say you want to accept that going up and doing a speaking event is something that could create a social threat to you. Maybe you could be rejected from all these important groups that you need for your career's flourishing. Even if you decide, yep, that is a true threat to me, sometimes you still want to pursue what you're doing anyway. Oftentimes we accept the risks, the threats involved with what we're doing, and we do it anyway. Because that's the kind of person we want to be, because we want to create this opportunity for ourselves. That's how most of us, especially doctors, decide to live our lives. And so with that, we need to recognize that our mind by default can work against us, against what we want in our values-based conscious decision. But subconsciously, our body's like, avoid the discomfort. Luckily, your subconscious mind isn't really the boss. Your conscious mind is. And by that I mean your conscious mind can override the decisions, the wants, the desires, the drives of the subconscious mind, that lower mind. The conscious mind's in control. You know, even if your subconscious mind was saying, don't put your hand in the fire, obviously, you could still decide to put your hand in the fire, right? And you could actually decide to keep it there. That's what the conscious mind is capable of. So I want us to understand our inclinations and our defaults to avoid discomfort. And I also want to recognize that we have so much power to decide a different path for ourselves. We don't have to accept the default. And that's what a lot of mindset coaching involves. Interrupting our default programming and just old conditioned programming that we've learned across the years in our lives. Particularly doctors have learned a lot of very non-useful programming throughout our training programs that were very strict and dogmatic. And not only does that affect our careers in ways that we don't want it to affect our careers, but it can spill out into our lives. So accepting that our lives are going to have about a third discomfort, negative emotion, unpleasantness, a good life, the best life. And that you can't construct a life without that. I'm sorry, and you're welcome. Let's get to building a better relationship with these negative emotions instead of needing to avoid and escape them. Because when we need to avoid and escape our negative emotions, they control us. And that's ultimately why I want you to adopt the mindset of being willing and able to feel any emotion, so that you're not bound to escaping and avoiding the emotions, and therefore having that escape and avoidance dominate your life, dominate your decisions and your behaviors. People often can't understand why they keep self-sabotaging. They can't understand why they keep doing things that they intellectually say they don't want to do. And the reason you keep doing these self-sabotaging behaviors is because you're not willing to feel an emotion. The self-sabotaging behaviors are an attempt for you to escape that emotional experience, right? And you're not aware of that. You feel like it all happens before you can even have a thought. And I agree, you're often not having a conscious thought about it. This is often a well-ingrained pattern of negative emotion. Oop, make that go away. Negative emotion, this is a bad thing. I better change what I'm doing because what I'm doing must be bad. Something's not right here. And then when you do whatever, procrastination over drinking, over eating, distracting yourself with social media, whatever it is, you do that thing and you feel better and you're like, that negative emotion's gone, so things are right again. But then you're like, whoa, wait a second, where did the time go? That's more the experience, that we're not aware of what's driving us in the moment, because this is shunted down into our pattern-based behaviors, into our limbic system, into our emotional brain. It's not explicit, it's not a conscious thought of like, oh, I don't want to feel this emotion. I want to feel better. I will feel better if I procrastinate, distract myself, eat, etc. It's something that is well practiced over often the span of our lifetime in terms of creating a coping mechanism. In this case, a maladaptive coping mechanism. And for some people, this creates, negative side effects in terms of the behavior that we use to escape the emotion. So for example, if you eat or drink or scroll social media, or you go and create drama or complain to somebody, these things can often have you showing up in ways that you don't want to show up, that aren't in your character, or you end up drinking more alcohol than you would want, or eating more food and maybe feeling the physical effects of those things. But it's also that you're simply not able to achieve what you set out to achieve. Take the example of procrastinating. Even if you're a procrastinator and you're like, well, I'm just, I'm cleaning the house. It's a good thing. Like no harm done here. But actually, and again, this is value-based, but to me, there is harm done. If I can't rely on myself to sit down and do what I wanted to do, if I don't get a task done in the allocated time that I'd planned, I'm breaking that relationship with myself. I'm not respecting myself. I want to be able to count on myself. So these are just some more tangible examples of how escaping our emotions, not being willing to feel our emotions, can lead to these two kinds of problems in our life. Either creating new problems, over consuming, whether it be food, alcohol, social media, or creating drama as a distraction, or just not getting what you planned done, not being able to rely on yourself, because instead of sitting with the emotion, persisting and doing the work or project, whatever you had planned to do, having that conversation with that person, you will keep putting it off and it won't get done because you're not willing to feel the emotion. If you are willing to feel the emotion instead of having to make it go away, now you're back in control. Now you can choose to stay and persist in that situation that evoked the emotion and not be derailed. Everything we do, even if you're not conscious of it, is because we expect that it's going to make us feel better. And the tricky thing about this is, especially when it comes to procrastinating or doing what I call softening emotions, where you put a pleasure on top like eating or drinking, is that you do feel better in those first few moments. You do temporarily feel better. And your mind learns that this will make me feel better, and you reinforce it time and time again. But ultimately, when you look at the big picture, you probably don't feel better. but your mind has trouble taking that big picture assessment of the situation in. And that's why we need to come back to mindset coaching and look at it from a different perspective than what our mind offers by default. So that's why I want you to develop the belief, which also comes with a skill set. I teach you the skill set in Dear Darling of how to feel an emotion, how to not resist an emotion, how to not react to an emotion, how to allow an emotion to be in your body, and ultimately move up the pyramid that I give you of not just enduring the emotion or allowing the emotion, but ultimately even inviting the emotion, which is such an empowering experience. And it's the way that I love to live my life. But for so many of us, this subconscious desire to avoid these negative emotions and this idea that a negative emotion is a signal that something's wrong and there's a bad thing happening drives us to not even come close to feeling the emotion. We design our life and make decisions around avoiding or thinking that we're able to avoid these emotions altogether. But again, I want you to think about how these negative emotions, including the deepest depths of the negative emotions, come part and parcel with the greatest heights of the positive and what they can give you back. If you were willing to feel any emotion, if you were willing to develop that skill, through mindset coaching of feeling any emotion, then what could you get? What could your life become? What would become available to you? Let me give you a few examples. If you are willing to feel vulnerable and truly show yourself to someone, truly tell them what you want, truly tell them what you don't like, truly tell them what's hard for you and what you love, then you create the opportunity for intimacy, being seen, being known, connection. If you're willing to feel rejected, actually put your authentic self forwards, then you create the opportunity for being truly accepted, right? As opposed to not being willing to be rejected and therefore kind of editing and modifying yourself, putting a fake version of yourself forward, and then being accepted for a fake version of you. And compare the satisfaction and the sense of connection that comes with this fake, edited, masked version of you versus I'm being my full self and they love me. These particular people, these are my people. You know, it's not going to be everyone, and that's another thought error that stands in our way of putting forth our full authentic self. If you're willing to feel disappointed, then you get the benefits of having high expectations. When I live my life, when I walk around the world with high expectations, I show up on another level. I show up as if the best case scenario is going to happen. My actions are more orientated towards creating that best case scenario. But I also know it's going to hurt a little bit and I'm going to have to manage my mind when those expectations aren't met. But I'm willing to feel disappointed so that I can have the benefits of the high expectations. If you're willing to feel lost, then you create the opportunity to have something great. If you're not willing to feel loss, then you're not going to ever hold something great because you're not willing to lose it, and you know that the nature of the world is that you can lose it. Listen, if you're willing to feel jealousy, then you create the opportunity to receive that message and see, that's something that I want. That's something that I connect with. If you're willing to want something, then again, you create the opportunity to go for it. And wanting might not feel like a negative emotion, but for a lot of us it is, because wanting inherently comes with a recognition that we don't have it. And there's always an uncertainty about whether we can get it or not. So there's some vulnerability there. But when you decide you want something, you create the best opportunity to fuel your actions to go and get it. If you're willing to feel failure, the shame that comes with that, the regret and so on, only then do you allow yourself to do new things. Only when you're willing to feel fear do you create the opportunity to do new things. So again, when you create the skill and when you have the belief that you're willing to feel any emotion, not only are you not controlled by the need to avoid or escape the emotions, but you also get those big positives that come part and parcel with the negatives. If you're willing to feel any emotion, your life expands. If you're not willing to feel your emotions, your life contracts from avoidance and from escaping the emotions. And we try and escape them or avoid them. We also don't get to sit with them long enough to see the thoughts behind them, to understand our mind and our experience better, and therefore give ourselves the opportunity to grow and evolve in our lives as opposed to just circling around the same mindsets and old beliefs that we always have, because we're never willing to sit with the emotions and see what's causing them. It's this introspection, it's this reflection that gives you the opportunity to show up in your value set. Because as you'll learn with coaching, there is no right or wrong way to do life, but what's most important is that you're doing it in a way that is in line with your value set, is in line with the person that you want to be, that you like your reasons for what you do. One of the most powerful mindsets is reminding yourself, I'm the kind of person who, and then inset that value set for you, the kind of person that you know you are and that you want to be and that you're always becoming, because that's what we want to drive your decisions. That's what we want to drive how you think about the world, not just your knee-jerk reactions to emotions and attempts to avoid negative emotions because your body by default doesn't like feeling them and thinks that they're a problem. I had the best session with one of my clients this morning who was really embodying this as a leader and a business owner. I'm the kind of person who, and it was that mindset and that drive from her values that allowed her to do all these hard things she's not been willing to do before, as opposed to in the past being driven by emotions, being driven by fear of hurting people and disappointing people, which is of course a lovely and considerate way to be, but we don't want that to drive her decisions in its entirety. We want her to get her values-based self on board too, in order to make the decisions that have her show up in the way she wants to show up in all different aspects of her business, of her role, and of her life in general. So allow your negative emotions in order to get more control back in your life. The more you resist, react to, and try to avoid your negative emotions, the more they control you. Don't avoid them, don't escape them. Allow them. And with mindset coaching, we'll get you to an empowered place of even inviting them. And then you're back in charge and you'll be able to do whatever you want in your short life. The next mindset, model of the world, belief system that I want to offer you is: my emotions hold messages. My emotions hold messages from my mind. I don't want to mute my mind. I don't want to mute my experience. I don't want to mute my life. I want to know what's going on. I want to be able to monitor how I'm experiencing the world, how I'm perceiving the world, and modify it where appropriate, where it doesn't suit my value set, so that I can create the life that I want. And I think you want that too. Most of us just don't realize we have the option. And we often don't realize we have the option because we've spent our lives muting our emotions, believing that they're not useful, that they're a nuisance, that they're a burden, they're just going to get in the way, but not realizing that emotions really function to get our attention, right? Because they have a message. They're saying, hey, this is important. And obviously another part of our emotions is to affect our physiology in different ways, to mobilize us physically, and also it affects the way we think. But a part particularly of negative emotions is to get our attention. We want to hear our emotions. We want to be able to experience and hear our emotions, because we can't constantly be listening to all our thoughts. We have 60,000 plus thoughts that psychologists have apparently somehow quantified. Suffice to say, we don't want to be in a position where we have to constantly monitor our thoughts all day. But our emotions, particularly negative emotions, are evoked when we have a thought about a problem or threat that we might want to pay attention to. So they're a really good shortcut system. They're a really good filter for us. When we get an emotion, we want to pay attention because our mind has perceived something that is potentially important to us. I love the emotions as smoke detectors analogy, because we have smoke detectors in order to pick up on potential house fires. They're only indirectly indicating that there could be a house fire. They're using smoke to sound the alarm and say, where there's smoke, there's potentially a house-threatening fire, a fire that could threaten your house and you in it as well. And that's really useful. We all have smoke detectors. In fact, they're mandatory in Australia. We have to have smoke detectors because there's such a big payoff to catching that house fire in terms of lives lost. I leave my smoke detector on Even though 100% of the time in my life, when the smoke detector has gone off, it's been burnt toast. 100% of the time, right? But I leave it on because I still want to be alerted and potentially inconvenienced to give attention to the fact that there's possibly a house fire here, right? And I want to offer you that that's the same with your negative emotions. I find that in my life, the ratio of times where my emotional alarm is going off in terms of the amount of times that it's been a serious threat, a significant problem, something that I want to react quickly to with urgency, else there will be severe consequences, versus the amount of times it's been burnt toast. You know, my mind perceiving a threat that's not actually a significant urgent threat that requires immediate reaction and explosive reaction to. That ratio is about the same as the amount of times when it's been burnt toast versus a house fire. I'm going to give it a little bit more wiggle room and say it's probably been 1% times where I want to react fast. Generously, I'm saying that. And 99% of the time, I do not need a fast reaction. It doesn't benefit me to react fast. And with that, fight, flight, freeze, appease, survival-focused response. So I want you to think of your negative emotions as smoke alarms, specifically not house fire detectors. Recognize the rate of false positives in those strong, compelling, negative emotions coming up. Think about how often your fear doesn't actually represent a true threat to you, a true immediate threat that you want to react to impulsively with urgency. But recognize that your thoughts are what create your emotions. Your fear, for example, comes from perceiving a threat in the environment, which we do just by pattern recognition often. We'll look for patterns that in the past were associated with threats, so we might get those patterns wrong. We might put things in the wrong categories. And with that, acknowledging that our brain does use this pattern recognition strategy, just like how the smoke alarms detect perceived or potential house fires through indirectly picking up on the smoke. That's what our emotions are representing too. They're representing a potential problem, a perceived threat, not an actual threat, not 100% slam dunk, this is a house fire, you better run. And particularly for us, we want to recognize that it is a relatively new thing that we live such physically safe lives. And our body hasn't apparently had time to adapt to these new, very safe conditions that don't need such urgent, dramatic physical reactions, responses, fighting or flighting to preserve our physical existence. Our biology just hasn't caught up. And so we still have these big default nervous system reactions, and that's quite normal. But again, even though it's our autonomic nervous system kicking off, you can interrupt that and you can take control of that with your conscious mind. Just like with the smoke detector, your smoke alarm goes off and you don't automatically leave the house. You look and check, is there actually a house fire? And I want you to do that in your life as well. I feel a big fear, anxiety, panic response coming on. And then with that, you know, it's just detecting smoke. The alarm's going off, it's detected smoke. A potential threat. What is my mind perceiving as a threat here? So I'm going to go and see if there's a match or a mismatch between my perception of the situation and the situation itself. Your nervous system will still be activated. That happens so quickly. Your amygdala, that fear recognition center, receives and processes information something like 8 to 12 times faster than our prefrontal logical thinking cortex, where we get our rational thought. So it's likely that you're going to get that fear response, or that nervous system activation, and then you've got to let that prefrontal cortex catch up. You've got to go and look at the situation and decide whether you're going to de-escalate this nervous system response or maybe roll with it. House fire. House fires happen. There are situations in life where we're still in danger, but just because we have a bad emotion doesn't mean that there's something bad happening in the environment or in our body. That's just a natural and old heuristic of our mind that served us very well over time in the past. But now we want to use our prefrontal cortex to adjust and make sure these patterns that we're recognizing, these old programs that we've got, are actually suitable for our current environment. And in particular, again, for the way that you want to show up in the world, for your values and your goals. Now, the other reason why it's so powerful for you to take on this mindset of recognizing that your emotions hold messages is not only because then you can start to decommission that urgent, reactive response that you commonly have when you feel a negative emotion, but also because those emotions, even the ones that aren't as urgent, aren't as hot, aren't as highly aroused as sort of a fear or panic response, all of our emotions hold messages. And I want to slow down and hear those messages from my mind. I want to understand how my mind is perceiving the world. I want to understand the ways that I'm perceiving things in a way that does not help me, that does not serve me, that's getting in my way, so I can move it out of the way and be the person I want to be, show up the way that I want to show up. I know that my mind is not rational or economical. I know that my mind will preference fears and it will preference loss aversion. I have all these kinds of biases that work against the person I want to be and the way that I want to show up. And my brain works that way because it's a human brain. This is just how our brains have evolved to work so far. And that's okay. We just want to be aware of it so that we can work with it. So when we're aware of the things that are creating emotions, and it gives us a trigger to go and look at our thoughts, our perception, how our mind is seeing the world, and it gives us an opportunity to clean up those perceptions, those interpretations, those mindsets that we have about the world and make sure they align with who we want to be. Because that's the only way that we get in control of our lives. It's the only way that we can interrupt this programming that we've practiced and then our brain will preference. So emotions that make us pay attention to bigger reactions to situations than we would expect or that we would have our best self show up in. Create opportunities for us to understand why we're showing up that way. What is our mind perceiving? What mindsets have we adopted? How are we interpreting the world? And do we like that? Is that aligned with who we want to be? You are never overreacting to a situation. You are always perfectly reacting to your thought, right? Your emotion will always be congruent with your thought, what you are perceiving about the situation. And again, when I say thought, it's not necessarily something that's conscious. But again, you use the emotion to go and look for, can I make conscious what I'm thinking right now? Because you want to see how you're perceiving the situation, how you're interpreting the situation, the meaning that you're having when you think you're overreacting or reacting in a way that's just not aligned with the person that you want to be, because then you can actually compare that perception with the facts of the situation and see where the disconnect is. But only when those two things are juxtaposed can you see, this is why I'm having this emotional reaction. It's not that I need to avoid this situation. It's not that there's anything wrong in this situation. It's not that I just can't handle this situation. But the way that you feel will be determined by what you're thinking. And that, my beautiful friend, is in your control. And in particular, my main point that I want to make here is it is in your control to the greatest extent in that moment when the emotion has shown it to you, right? Before that situation, before you were, quote, triggered, before you had an emotional response, you would have never been able to become aware that you were perceiving the world in that way, right? Your mind just would have kept using that model of the world, that lens of the world, and you would have never been any the wiser. So this emotional reaction that you're having is a precious opportunity to reveal and potentially edit and update, upgrade your mindset, right? A strong emotion says, hey, this is important. And if you're having a big reaction, either positive or negative, let's take a big negative reaction, your brain's saying, hey, this is a big problem. And then from there, you can now ask curiously, that's so interesting. Why? What's the problem here? Like you're sitting your brain down and interviewing it and being like, what is going on here? I'm so interested in why you had that reaction. Tell me more about how you're understanding the world, how you're perceiving the world, what you're making this mean. And this feels like the right time to quickly mention the process of memory reconsolidation, which many neuroscientists and psychologists suggest is one of the core active interventions within all of this cognitive therapy that we do. I'm dropping this concept in here particularly because the emotional activation in your body is a necessary part of the memory reconsolidation process. By that I mean being able to bring up and edit your old models of the world. They talk about your memories and your sort of patterns of how you interpret the world, the lenses with which we see the world, the models that we've created in our mind to understand the world. This is how the world works. This is what this thing means. When X happens, then Y happens, sort of ideas. These aren't things that we're explicitly aware of. We don't have conscious thoughts about our models of the world and how the world works often. But instead, they're things that we've learned often over our childhood in large part, but also our conditioning into our adulthood as well. And these go implicitly down into our subconscious mind. We don't get awareness of these. So they use the analogy of these memories, these learnings that we've gathered over time about how the world works, as being zip files. So when you have a zip file on your computer, the actual content is hidden away. We can't read that file. But in the presence with the activation of an emotion, it's like double clicking that zip file. You can suddenly open it up and see the memory, the learnings, the thoughts, the beliefs, the model of the world behind that, right? So when you have an emotion, even though you might at the time feel like, gosh, this sucks. I really wish I wasn't feeling this big emotion right now. I really wish I wasn't overreacting to this situation right now. This is also an opportunity for you, if you want it, to not just push it down or push it away, dismiss it or try and move on from it, but to double click and open the zip file and update this model of the world. If you want to not react in this way in the future, then this is your best opportunity to do it when you have that emotional activation. And this is what I do in my coaching sessions as well. I don't think I've ever had a coaching session with one of my clients where I didn't evoke emotions with them, because I know this is one of the core parts of the processes to actually updating our belief systems. So there needs to be an emotional activation and there needs to be a mismatch of experience. So we do that mismatch of experience with simulating and using our imagination and talking about incongruencies with this old belief system while we've got that emotional activation. But you also, of course, can do this in your life when you have an emotion evoked, activated, when you're experiencing this incongruence as well of the situation versus the way that your mind is perceiving it. This is an opportunity for you to see what's going on, to be prompted to see this old model of the world, but particularly to update it. All right, so for example, you might have an implicit learning stored away in your mind from when you were a child that says, when I express my needs, other people I love get exasperated and angry, and therefore I'm not going to do that. Right? And you might have a situation in your life where you've expressed your needs and you have that emotion come up, or you've got an opportunity to express your needs and your emotions come up, and then you have an opportunity to perceive a potentially different reaction, have that mismatch with that emotional activation, and then update that old model of the world that you have, right? This emotional activation and this mismatched experience together put your brain in a plastic state, put this part of your brain where the memory is stored, or the network in which your memory is stored here, into a plastic state, i.e. a state that can be changed. Not only does this process allow you to update old learnings and therefore experience adult learning, incorporate adult learnings into your models of the world, but what's so exciting is that it preferentially strengthens recent learnings, right? We often think that the learnings that we had in our childhood are the most dominant and can never be changed and the most important, and we're kind of just stuck with them. Like if you had a bad childhood, then too bad, you're stuffed. But recognizing that this process of memory reconsolidation actually preferentially strengthens new learnings, right? We have so much opportunity for plasticity here, but because most of us are unwilling to feel our emotions, and we think that our negative emotions in particular, but any of our emotions, we think that they don't have any utility so mistakenly, we also miss out on this process of being able to create new learnings and override the unuseful learnings from those earlier times and all the conditioning. And particularly for us as doctors, we got a lot of strong and not useful conditioning throughout our medical training that we really want to undo if we want to live a big, beautiful, bold, full life, particularly if we want to be unshakable. So your emotions hold messages. Don't mute them. And also recognize the opportunity that comes with listening to the messages, allowing the emotion to be in the body, listening to the message, and then deciding, does this model of the world, does this belief, this perception, this interpretation, this meaning I've added, does it actually match the situation? Or is this an opportunity for me to update my model of the world here to serve the person I want to be, to live the life I want to live, and to be unshakable? This is so powerful to do because we spend the majority of our life not in our conscious thinking state, but driven by our subconscious patterns. So when you've got so many subconscious patterns that are actually old and outdated and don't serve the person you want to be, that don't create the behaviors you want to create, that don't create the experience of life that you want to experience, that don't allow you to perceive the world in a way that's values-based to you and therefore act from that, then it's easy to live a life that's really out of alignment. So when you get the opportunity to update these subconscious beliefs, these subconscious memories, these subconscious models of the world, then take it. But you need to be willing to feel your emotions to do that and recognize that your emotional activation is a gift in this way. By being willing to feel your emotions, by using something like coaching to have you update and edit those memories in a way that's really strategic when you're feeling a difficult emotion, then you can totally change your life in a way that is also particularly effortless because you make that change in your mind and that goes down into your subconscious, and then that just works on autopilot too. Imagine having autopilot thoughts and models of the world that really served you. And that's so much of the work that we are doing together here. Now, the last thing that I'll say on this point of emotions hold messages. It's very understandable, and there's nothing wrong with you if you feel like you want to avoid feeling the emotion and avoid looking at the thoughts behind the emotions. Again, we've got this heuristic that and negative emotion means a negative thing. And naturally, we want to keep that at a distance. We don't want to get closer to that, even just in our exploration of our mind or experience, because we intuitively know that we can experience so much from our mind. You know, we can imagine a terrible, awful situation, and we're only going to feel worse as we imagine that situation, right? That's the power of the human mind. We can simulate these situations in our lives that make us feel so afraid or threatened. And with that, our body doesn't really know the difference between this simulation of our mind, what our mind is generating, and what is actually happening in the world outside of us. If we're thinking it, it might as well be true to our body. Our body will prepare physiologically and emotionally based on what our mind is perceiving. So recognizing this, I want to give you one more analogy that I've made called fearing the fog. So this is referring to our desire to keep what we fear at a distance. And I want you to think about what happens when you keep fog at a distance. When you keep it at a distance, it looks impossibly dense. It looks completely unmanageable. It looks like something that you could not penetrate and walk through. It looks like there is no way forwards. However, only when you approach it, you start to see that it is less opaque. You start to see that you could actually take the next step. And then with each step, you gain more transparency. Even when you're in the fog, sometimes it's the next step that shows you the next meter or half a meter in front of you. But when you were 2 steps back, it looked dense there too. This is the case with your emotions and your perceived threats, your fears too. Actually, what I find with my clients is the further they keep a distance from them, the less manageable they seem. The closer they get to them, the more manageable they seem. I even go to the extent of taking my clients to their worst case scenario cognitively. I have them imagine being there, and then from there, I have them tell me, and then what, for the 15th time. And then with that, they tell me how they would make it okay, how they would have their own back and take care of themselves. And this is walking into the fog. And it is so empowering, ironically, to go to the worst case scenario for this reason, for somebody who has a resilient mindset. P.S. Little tip, often the worst thing that can happen to you is in itself a negative emotion. Just think about that one for me. The next mindset that I want to offer you, that I'm truly so excited about, because not only the impact but also the uniqueness of this concept, is validating yourself is productive, is impactful, is critical. This is something that I haven't been taught in any of my training and that I've explored over the years deeply, both with working with my clients and doing my own work, my own coaching and self-coaching work. It's a skill that I train myself in and I train my clients in that I don't hear other people talking about. But I think in that way, it is one of the most underrated and with that commonly missed processes and skills that we can develop to be truly unshakable. Validating ourselves, and in particular here, I want to talk about validating our negative emotion experiences. You'll hear me talk so much about questioning the thoughts behind your emotions and us creating some distance and potentially switching off the emotion from the perspective of realizing that this emotion actually isn't representing the problem that I think it is. This emotion isn't representing a problem at all. It can effectively turn down or just totally switch off the emotion. We can stop perpetuating that emotion in our body, and that can be such a beautiful, incredible fix. I use that so often in my life, approaching the emotion from the perspective of the thought that caused it. And also, I found there are situations in my life where even when I understand that the thought behind the emotion isn't true or isn't something that I'm particularly worried about, and even just recognizing that the emotion's only there because of a thought, not because of the situation. Even if, let's say, it's from an invalid thought, an untrue thought, the emotion in itself wants to be validated. And that is my process, it's my solution to be able to move forwards from that emotion and to not stay stuck in that emotion and to spiral from the emotion. Because as I said in this case, rationalizing and recognizing that there isn't actually a problem here, recognizing that the emotion's only there because of a perception, it hasn't worked in this case. I need another process here sometimes in some cases. And the best way I can explain it is to personify your emotion. To think of your emotion as a part of you. That emotion is representing a part of you. And although the dominant part of you that's calling the shots and making the decision, and that's got the rational thoughts and that knows that you're safe and everything's good, the dominant part of you is like, that's not a problem, I'm not worried about that, that thought's not true or not valid. There's a part of you that is worried or is hurt or is in fear or is in disappointment, whatever negative emotion. And by personifying that part of you, now we can understand through this very human lens why it's useful to validate that emotional experience in itself, separate from whatever thoughts, whatever perceptions caused it, true or not, who cares? We're just focusing on the emotional experience right now. And with that, I'd like you to consider that emotional suffering is not nothing. Actually, we know that emotional pain, we've done studies on rejection. Rejection in terms of the brain regions that it activates has significant overlap with the brain regions activated with physical pain, right? So in so many ways, it's reasonable to consider it like a pain experience. It's not just an emotion, it's not just a feeling. Unless you want to say that pain is just an experience in that way too. If you had pain or you had somebody in front of you with pain, you wouldn't say, oh, well, the pain's just caused by so now you should feel fine because we know what's causing the pain and it's invalid, or that stimulus has stopped. The initial trauma is now over, so the pain experience that you're having is like whatever. We know what caused it and it's going to be fixed and healed soon, so it's fine. No, we acknowledge people in pain. We validate their physical pain experience with ease. We don't always give our emotional pain experiences the same respect. And I think this keeps us stuck. That's my point here. So I want to use the analogy that I give to my clients, which is the boardroom model, which is another analogy that I'm incredibly proud of, that I think makes it so much easier to navigate your mind. So in the boardroom model, I talk about how you yourself, you're like the person who's calling the shots in this company. You are, I guess, the CEO. Probably a better way to talk about it is rather than the boardroom, it's an advisory board. So whether it's an advisory board or a boardroom, you have recruited a group of people, particularly especially with all kinds of different backgrounds and all kinds of different expertise to help advise you and guide you and keep you within the company's mission, serving the stakeholders, acting within your values, and ultimately keeping the company alive and prospering. And with you yourself, you've kept these parts of your mind subconsciously that also can advise you on particular things. So in this case, say you've got a part of your mind that's really worried about this public speaking event coming up. I like using public speaking because apparently it's the worst fear in the world. So you've got this public speaking event coming up, and with this, so the whole board's kind of in agreement that you're gonna do this event. You wanna do it, it's a good thing for the company mission, it's gonna be overall a good idea. Yeah, it comes with risks, but we're doing it. However, there's one person on your board who you've particularly recruited because they're really concerned with risk management. They're the person you've recruited because they're very aware of all the things that can go wrong and all the risks involved. And you want somebody on your team who's going to be like, hey, have you considered this? And with that, when you've made the decision that you're going to go ahead and do this event, and that person hasn't had a time to be heard with their concerns, they don't feel like they've been seen or heard, and they're starting to worry that the company is going to suffer because of this, that the ship is going down, then how do you expect them to behave in that case? This person who's got all this expertise over their life experience, they've got all this education and training in that area, and furthermore, it's their job to advise you on this stuff. If you just ignore them, right? You just dismiss them and say, we're not listening to you, we're not considering you. You would probably expect them to not only make more noise and make more problems, but obviously to continue feeling that anxiety about what's about to go ahead, right? And they're just doing their job. And that's what we do with these parts of ourselves all the time. We've made a decision about what we're doing, and then there are parts of us that are still worried and they haven't been addressed. And when they have good reasons, they think, to be concerned about our safety ultimately, then it makes sense that they'll keep bugging you. I think about this like having lots of tabs up on the computer and just keeping them open and kind of just draining your energy because they keep rumbling away at this kind of background anxiety. It's not dominant, it's not changing your actions, but it's still taking some of your energy, isn't it? It's still taking some of that computer's processing power. And in the worst case, it might turn into self-sabotage. If this person's really worried, they might try and get in the ears of the other board members and be like, hey, we need to stop this. We need to sink this ship and stop her from going out there and doing that speaking event. And then hello, before you know it, you're self-sabotaging, trying to create safety from that part of you that feels unsafe. Now, in terms of validating yourself, personifying this board member, even with the decision that you're going to move forwards, how do you think that person would respond if you sat them down, you had a meeting with them, or you heard them out on the board, you let them express all of their concerns, you respected them, you honored them, you truly heard them and considered what they had to say? When you think about an actual human being, the way that you treat them with their concerns or fears or opinions, perspectives, and in particular with their emotional experience, their emotional pain. And when you think about how they'll respond and behave so differently depending on how you treated them, whether you simply gave them the time of day, gave them the airtime to be heard, whether you let them know that their perspective or their pain, their experience was considered, it is known, it is recognized, it is acknowledged, it's taken into consideration, versus dismissing or ignoring or even belittling or blaming that person. And remember, in both cases, you're still going ahead with the same outcome. We're not even considering that you might change your mind based on these interactions. We're still going ahead as a company. You as the director of your life, you're still going ahead with the same decision, the same plan. You're not changing your plan based on hearing out that person on your board and that part of you. But just by hearing them out and treating them with that respect treating them like a person, you already intuitively know from your experience with people how differently they will behave in this situation. And they might even get on board when you're saying, thank you for your concern, and for but reasons, we're doing this anyway. And your concerns are valid. And if that happens, then we'll do but. Or even just, yes, I hear you, and let's agree to disagree, and we're moving ahead. But the difference is validating that person versus dismissing and ignoring them. Thinking about how they behave when they're dismissed and ignored. Even from the best place of being truly concerned, they will still behave in a way that creates more problems, more challenges for you, and uses more energy from your company if they're not on board. So I do this all the time for myself, and I encourage my clients to learn this skill. It is a skill for themselves to be able to allow the emotion, even if the thought behind it is invalid or not useful to them or won't change their plan or has any relevance in their life. We validate the emotion, we personify the emotion, and we give that the airtime, the attention, the acknowledgement, the validation it wants. I once heard somebody say, thoughts are electricity and emotions are chemistry. And as much as we don't actually know what creates conscious thought, but I suppose the signals from our brain that kind of communicate perception to our body, our brain's perception, we could say they're the electric neural pathways. But I like this comment because even sometimes when I recognize that I don't believe the thought behind the emotion, and even sometimes when intellectually, say I had a fear response and now intellectually I know I'm safe, I feel safe, I still have that activation in my body that sometimes takes some time to de-escalate. You know, you've set off this reaction of events. You've sent these hormones into their bloodstream that sometimes just need to run their course and don't necessarily get stripped back out of the bloodstream, do they? So the emotional pain or discomfort, the emotional experience, can linger longer than the thought that triggered it or the perception that triggered it. So that's another reason why we want to recognize that just changing our thoughts, it often works. It's often so useful. It's such a useful strategy. It's such a useful skill to have. And also we want to have this skill in our pocket as well of being able to A, allow, and B, validate our emotions in themselves. Now, a lot of us don't bother with or don't want to sit down with that part of ourselves that's not on board with our plan, because we might have this assumption that, well, if we hear out that part of our brain, then we will just believe it and obey it, right? That if we hear them out, then it means that we will start taking on those thoughts, believing those thoughts. If we hear out that part of us, it's like, oh, maybe it's a bad idea to do this speaking event, then we will start to believe those thoughts too. And then we will obey them, as in we will go and act them out, and we will take ourselves out of the speaking event. But recognize the difference between just sitting down with another person, hearing out their concerns, and being the person in charge who makes the decision. Just because you hear them out, just because you hear out that part of your mind, just because you let yourself feel that emotion, doesn't mean you need to do anything with it. It doesn't mean you need to action it. It doesn't mean you need to take on those thoughts too. You can hear them, acknowledge them, validate them, and agree to disagree, and still continue on with the company plan. Because at the end of the day, it's not any one part of your mind, of your body, that is in charge. It's you, your conscious mind. You're the director of what you do in your life. All right, my beautiful friends, I hope you take some time to really feel into this one. This is not an intellectual exercise. Again, this is really about feeling your emotions. You've got to be willing to feel the emotion to go and do these processes. But learning to validate your own emotional experience, even if it's just a part of you, is going to be an absolute game changer. I promise, and I can't wait to hear your success stories. I just got the most beautiful success story for one of our members in Dare Darling who had an experience of validating her own emotions with her partner, and not only did it let her take care of herself and give herself what she needed and then allow her to show up in that situation in the way that she wanted to, that was aligned with her values, but it also actually created more connection with her partner because of this new mindset that she has around her emotions. Total win-win. Enjoy. Finally, the last belief in this pillar, the last mindset that I want to offer you in terms of your relationship with your emotions is I use my emotions on purpose. I use my emotions strategically. I create my emotions. I'm in control, not my emotions, right? So this is all about emotions and actions, taking action with and sometimes despite our emotions. So firstly, I want to talk about the utility of emotions. So in Dear Darling, you guys know why emotions are so useful. A myriad of reasons, but chief among them is our emotions drive our behavior. Our emotions are the reason that we do anything in life. Emotions are like our brain's currency. We do things in life because we think that they will make us feel a certain way. And sometimes we do things because we think they will help us escape the feeling that we're having. It's just a different version of trying to feel better. We're always trying to feel better. We don't do this consciously. This is a subconscious driver. All the choices that you're making in your life, I want you to really sit back and think about this for yourself. The choices that you're making in your life are because you think you're gonna feel better because of those choices, right? Perhaps you're doing this career because it allows you to think thoughts about yourself that make you feel good. Perhaps you're trying to go to the gym and get fit because you think when you're fit, you're gonna feel better. And I'm not saying these are right or wrong, but I'm just trying to underscore the reason behind these decisions, these desires, these choices is inherently emotional. Nobody's not emotional. There are just people without awareness of their emotions. Now, speaking of, when it comes to the utility of emotion, using your emotions, picking useful emotions, what this requires is self-awareness. Because what emotion is useful depends not only on the context and what you're trying to achieve, i.e. what behavior you're trying to drive, but it also depends on you. What emotions for you drive which behaviors? Because me having the same emotion as you might drive a different behavior from you in your life. We might have different behavioral tendencies from our emotions, and that can be due to personal or perhaps even evolutionary reasons, but also conditioning and socialization and so on. What happens is, as I've just suggested, we will make decisions based on what we think will make us feel better, and that's the job of our prefrontal cortex. It has this ability to simulate, imagine us doing something in advance, right? And in that, making a prediction about how we're gonna feel. So what you have a desire or drive to do will depend on the prediction that your prefrontal cortex is making. Now, in particular here, I want to focus on the utility of positive emotions. And I am strategically doing that based on my experience with my clients who are predominantly doctors. And if they're not doctors, they're other highly educated people like lawyers, researchers, scientists, business owners, entrepreneurs. And they, like me, often come to me with these subconscious and sometimes very conscious, explicit mindsets of my stress is useful. My anxiety is useful. My self-criticism is what gives me my edge. My self-doubt is what shows me my deficit so that I can improve, right? And I'm still recovering from that because I feel like I received that conditioning over years and years and years of my schooling life. And many doctors seem to think this too, that our self-criticism, our skepticism, even about ourselves, keeps us sharp. Now, that's not entirely false. I'm not saying that these emotions have no utility, but we don't have time to talk about the nuances of that right now. But what I really want to preference is most of us are underutilizing our positive emotions, and it's such an incredible win-win because not only are they really productive, really useful, but they also obviously feel quite good. And my life was totally transformed when I started to use these positive, productive emotions to drive the behaviors I wanted. Such a win-win. And it's so much less exhausting and tiring as well to live this way and be driven from this. Now I really understand that I achieved all I achieved despite that dominance of negative emotions, but I was really just experiencing a correlation versus causation problem. I was always feeling negative and I always had stress and anxiety, and so that correlated with my success, but it definitely wasn't the cause of my success. Imagine if this was true for you too. Imagine if you could be driven towards your amazing achievements, towards the life you want from a positive place. I didn't used to believe that was possible. I thought my doubts and criticisms were the thing that created motivation and drive. Wrong. And the only way that I started to understand and learn this was through building self-awareness, from recognizing and reflecting on how those emotions actually affected my behaviors and my outcomes. Not through somebody just telling me, you should be more positive, it's productive. You should be less negative, it's only having a detrimental effect on your performance. Self-awareness. I remember the first time that in real time, experientially, I finally got a glimpse of understanding that my stress wasn't improving my performance. And it was actually when I was jumping onto a CrossFit box. I just started CrossFit. I was learning how to jump onto the box, like quite a high box, jump with 2 feet up, sort of do like a tuck jump. And I remember the first time I walked up to the box and I was like, this is fun, let's do it. Then, when it was a part of a competition that we were doing, when we were sort of racing or doing the most reps, we were getting through the workout and I wasn't just playing around, I was determined to do the most jumps possible. And so I remember that moment of kind of like steadying my feet, preparing myself, sizing up the box and getting ready to jump. In the last moment, thinking, I don't know if I can make that. I don't know if I'm going to get my feet high enough. And I jumped with that hesitation and I missed the box. I sort of kicked and shinned the box. It's quite a painful miss. And I really felt how much that hesitation affected the flow of my body. I think about this too when I watch basketballers throw that one-pointer shot. They stand at that same line, pro basketball players, and they would have done that exact shot with minimal variables, right? These are indoor courts, same distance, same ball size. They would have done that shot so many times in their life. But the variable as to whether they get it in is their mind-body control. And if there's something slightly off in their mindset, such that their body doesn't do what they want it to do, or there's something slightly off in that communication, then they can miss it. And they do. You see them miss it so often, more often than you would expect. But it's only because we don't appreciate the effect of our mindset and in particular our stress response in how that can interfere with excellent motor control. I used to be quite a good little swimmer actually when I was in school. I was a competitive swimmer, won lots of state medals. I went to swim at the Pan Pacific Games and those kind of national events. And as I got older, I started to bomb, just bomb. And that's kind of how I ended swimming. But what was interesting wasn't just that I'd bomb in terms of going to race and then not winning, but in particular, I wasn't even doing my best times. I would train so much faster than I would race. And in retrospect, I can see I would sit there working myself up, putting so much pressure on myself and creating so much stress, swimming the race in my head before the actual race. And then when I got to the pool, all that stress completely hindered and totally hurt my performance. When I was in the early years of med school, I definitely thought that my anxiety and my stress was the thing that fueled me to study. But now I realize, again, I was able to study and perform despite that, and despite all the exhaustion, despite the lowered level of critical thinking, and also memory retention and my sleep, things like that, that stress and anxiety caused. In a very obvious way now, I can very much see that my speaking performance is not enhanced by my anxiety, but actually, again, it's those positive emotions that help me speak really well and perform really well when it comes to these events that most people would agree are stress-inducing. But in particular, I get myself into a positive place because I know for me personally which emotions are useful for me in that context. And then I use my mind management skills that I train you in through coaching in order to generate those emotions and to put on the bench the emotions that I don't want driving my actions. More on that later. Again, a lot of people seem to think that something like your voice shaking or your heart beating isn't something that you can control. And even medical people will particularly say it's your autonomic nervous system. It's an automatic response. But with mind management, with coaching, with mindset coaching, you'll come to learn that just because, yes, I agree, it's an automatic involuntary response that will start without your awareness, and you can't necessarily prevent it from happening in the first place. However, what we can do is interrupt it. We can stop perpetuating it. And so while my lips might start shaking, or while my heart might start beating, with my self-awareness and with my mind management skills, I can de-escalate that response instead of allowing it to escalate. And that's all I need to be able to perform well. I don't need to totally prevent it. I need to A, not allow it to escalate, and B, even be able to de-escalate it. So when it comes to which emotions are useful, I find I really have to convince my doctors that positive emotions are useful. And the way that I do that is through eliciting self-awareness, looking at how those emotions actually affect you individually, personally. Again, it's great to have studies and be able to look at averages and tendencies of populations, but nobody is truly average. Average doesn't exist. And when you have this ability to cause an effect on yourself and watch for that effect, that's the best, most scientific study you could do, because you're only really concerned with your own results here, aren't you? So just get the answers from yourself. And this is really a big part of what we do in coaching. Yes, I teach you how your mind works and how to use your mind, how to manage your mind, how to use your thoughts and emotions. I teach you these belief systems that you can use if you wish to direct your life and decisions and show up in the world in a way that is unshakable. And also in that whole process, we're developing self-awareness. We're giving you the skills to create self-awareness. Now, often what I find is we've made these little heuristics of hard work is what creates results. Hard work feels bad. Therefore, to get results, we have to feel bad. You know, these kind of flawed premises and then the flawed logic that comes from that. And these are the kinds of things that you've probably never explicitly heard in your mind before, but commonly doctors would have been conditioned in this way over time. And so one of the processes is bringing up these old belief systems, these old memories, these old models of the world, and then editing them, as I've spoken about before. And then also building some evidence for how these positive emotions could actually be really, really useful to you. And with that, I really like to show my members, my clients, that not all pain is useful. You know, we simplify it down to feeling bad is the way to create results. Results come from feeling bad. And therefore we say, to get results, it must feel bad. But not all discomfort is useful too, right? And so what we often find is we put ourselves in these uncomfortable situations and we create all this extra discomfort in our life. And not only is it not serving us, creating any results, but it's not even flagged in our minds because we're like, oh, well, this is just a part of like a brilliant, difficult life. But I think that is one of the biggest and most unfortunate lies that so many hard workers have learned. Your big, brilliant, amazing life and the most incredible results don't have to be all pain to get the gain. They could come with so much less pain, especially if you manage your mind and start to build this self-awareness. So in terms of using our emotions on purpose in our life, we have to work out what emotions are useful to us. And then we need to recognize that we actually have the ability to generate emotions. And this is one of the most incredible lessons that you'll get from mindset coaching. The ability to essentially switch on and switch off certain emotions using your mind. When you understand that those emotions come from your perception. They come from what your mind's perceiving. They come from the thoughts you're having, the meaning that you're adding to the situation that you're perceiving. It's quite likely, if you've never had a mindset coach in your life, that nobody has ever told you, like me, that you can generate your own emotions. You don't have to wait for the world to passively create your emotions for you. You actually have control of your own emotions. You can generate the emotion you want to feel. This is life-changing. People say, how do I feel motivated? How do I feel confident? How do I feel calm? And they'll say, oh, I'm bored. Oh, I'm just not interested. Oh, I'm not inspired. Oh, I'm sad. And clearly in saying this, not realize that they have all that they need in order to feel the way they want to feel. That's what mindset coaching taught me. We take responsibility for our emotions, and in doing that, we get control. I train you in the how of this in Dare Darling. And in Dare Darling in particular, I even give you the motivation system check. Go and check out that video if you haven't yet. If ever you're not feeling motivated, watch this system. I've got a 3-point checklist that will help you troubleshoot why you're not feeling motivated and get you feeling motivated, creating that emotion of motivation on demand. But requisite to all of this work on the how to do it, I need you to first believe that it's possible in order to actually implement it. Just quickly, I want to give you some examples of some emotions that I'll commonly use in my life, that I'll commonly generate on purpose because they serve me. Service. Service is one of my most powerful emotions. Determination, calm, gratitude, appreciation, celebration, proud, excited, focused, confident, love. They're positive and some of them are more neutral, and even determination is very low on the neutral. It's almost a little bit uncomfortable, but they're useful to me, so I'll generate them on purpose. Again, with self-awareness, it's good to acknowledge that self-love and self-compassion don't necessarily lead to these behaviors that are just condoning of all of our bad habits or some kind of ease and laziness. But think about how if you are loving or being compassionate to a child, like somebody who you really loved, you don't allow them to just keep doing things that hurt themselves because they're easy. From love, you will give people this sort of tough love or fierce self-compassion, as it's being called, that motivates you to do the hard thing, but it's the loving thing in that it's good for you. In saying that, it's not just the positive and neutral emotions that are useful. Of course, the negative emotions have uses too. And definitely on purpose, I will decide to feel sadness, to feel grief, to feel anger, to feel all kinds of different emotions. Again, depending on the context, depending on my goal, depending on what I want. But to be unshakable, I want you to realize you have this power to generate your own emotions. And it's very possible that nobody's ever told you in your life that you had this power, so you've never used it. Finally, because we don't have total control of our thoughts, we also don't have total control of our emotions, right? We want to grab and utilize the power, the responsibility that we do have, and also acknowledge that it's not going to be a perfect control situation, and that's okay. We can still take action in the direction we want with these negative or non-useful emotions. Let me explain a little bit of how to do it. This is really something that we do more with coaching and with the how of mind management, but I just want to sprinkle a little bit in here so you can get the full idea of using emotions. So you can watch the last video where I talked about the boardroom analogy. And remember that we sat this person down who was worried about the plan. They weren't completely on board. And we sat them down and we heard them out. And despite that, we decided to still go ahead with our plan, right? So there's kind of 3 steps here. You can sit this part of your mind down. Say they're anxious. You're trying to take action towards this thing, but you're feeling anxious. And so you're worried that the anxiety will hold you back. It doesn't have to. So you sit this person down and you say, thank you for your concern. Step 1. Step 2, and we're doing this anyway. Step 3, and I'll take care of you if or when things go wrong. I've got you, I've got your back, we're good. And you won't be blamed, you won't be judged, you won't be criticized, you're safe. They can have those concerns. We don't have to change their mind or get them totally on board and have them agreeing with every single idea for them to be able to cooperate with us. Another way that I like to think about this is if you were driving to a destination and you had a worried child in the passenger seat and they were saying, Mommy, I don't want to go there, or I don't want to drive, it's not safe driving, it's not safe there. And they're basically like, Mommy, can I drive? Because I want us to go somewhere else. And of course, you're like, no, my love, we've decided we're going here today. I've decided we're going here today. I've decided we're going to take the risk of driving. And I know it's not without risk. I acknowledge that. And I'm going to take responsibility for that. And we're going to do this together. It's okay for you to be worried. I understand. And thank you for telling me. And also, you're going to sit in the passenger seat and I'm in control. I'm driving. So here it's like your anxiety can come along for the drive, but it can't drive. It's not going to get control. You're in control. You're deciding where you're driving. You're deciding the direction. It can sit in the passenger seat. Think about how you talk to a worried child. I hear you. I hear your concerns. I know you're scared, honey. And we're doing this. We're doing it together. We're gonna be okay. I'll take care of us. So you don't have to have complete congruence in your emotions, but which emotion is driving your behavior? Which emotion is driving your decisions? That you get to decide.